today we are going to do something a little bit different from what we normally do. My name is Yoli O, and I'm going to talk to you about the process of being born and going through your life and the role that your parents actually ought to play in that according to Daoist ideas. When we look to the birthing process in the West, you can clearly see that until the 17th century in Europe and later also in the Americas, women were relatively free in how they gave birth, and there were a lot of different kind of traditions. When we look at China, there was a preference for seated delivery, and we talk about that a little bit later. The lying down position was a preference by doctors because it's easier for them, and in the education process at school they learn how to give delivery in a lying down position where a woman lies on her back, and sometimes even where her legs are being tied up so that she cannot pull her legs away. It is a form of torture which is a little bit torturesque. When you see the development in the West, you see that in the 17th century people started doing lying down. In the same time, midwives were still doing vertical cesareans if they had to do a cesarean, and then the women were all of a sudden forced to do a horizontal cesarean, which is much more damaging to the belly and therefore also gives longer time issues with health for women, which are usually incorrectable. At the moment, when you look at the lying down position, you see that in the 19th century it even went so far as to move the birthing process more and more towards the hospital. Nowadays, hospital births are actually quite common, and I remember when I was young, I was born at home. But when I look at my sister, who is born only 3 years later, she was born in the hospital. And since the 1960s, in countries like the Netherlands also, there was this 50-50 division, I think, between birthing at home and hospitals, but nowadays most birthings are at home. In the United States, in China, in many other countries, birthing in the hospital is the most common thing. I remember my sister at a certain point, she was highly pregnant, my kung fu sister, and she was going to the hospital to give delivery, and in the same afternoon she already got back because she also did a seated birthing. That was all very easy. So why is this vertical seating preferred by Chinese medicine in general, and why are we also advocating that, of course, in the birthing process for our Taoist mothers or people who would like to have a Taoist lifestyle? And for this we have to ask ourselves a few questions. In mothers. Well, let me give you 9 different reasons, or maybe 8, because I already gave you one. Because namely, when you're lying down on your back, you push your baby uphill, so you have to do much more work. The contractions are more painful. The pushing is actually giving torture to the child, and so on and so on. So there are lots of reasons why not to do lie down birthing. First of all, when you are going to do a seated birth, you have to choose your position properly. You have to go either stand, which is common, of course, for people on the farmland, what they used to tell me in China, because people are working with their bellies full of baby, and at the moment when they give birth, then the baby will just be born during the work, basically. So it was very easy to give birth in a standing position, and even when walking, because that replaces more or less the contraction time and sensations. Then you have the position on the knees, where you are giving birth on your knees, but not sitting, right? And then you could sit, of course, also, and then sit on an elevated chair so that there is an opening underneath your baby canal. And then there is the seated on the heels, which is also an option, where you have also different positions, like the half seated position where you're actually standing in a posture where your butt is above your knees, or you sit in a crouching position where you sit with your butt close to your heels. And this is a little bit more difficult position, but yeah, you can imagine that maybe if you are not completely mobile in your legs or you feel weak, that maybe is a preference. At the moment, when you are taking this position, then gravity, of course, already pulls the baby down. So as a result of that, it is easier to let the baby sink in and come out. It will seek its own way, basically, because it sees an opening down there and it goes in there and it will automatically squeeze in. The baby does not have an instinct to pull itself back. But it also doesn't have really a instinct to crawl up against the hill. So that's why you have to push it out when you're lying on your back. When you are looking at the results of vertical birthing, you see that there are much less interventions necessary. The birthing process is more natural and it is therefore also way more easy. There are less contractions required for the whole birthing process. So when the contractions start, almost automatically the water breaks and so on, then the child starts coming. Another side effect is that it is much less painful, and this less painful, of course, makes the whole process of birthing way more attractive for a woman, because the birthing process is, or can be, way more pleasurable. And that is, of course, also very important, because if there's less damage because of the birthing, the chances that both the mother and the child are surviving are much bigger. Ironically, when you look at historical dramas in China and Korea also, the birthing is almost always done on the back, almost never on in the crouching position, and as a result of that you very often see that children or the mother are in danger, because that is good for the dramatic effect. But the reality is not like that. In the television series like Vikings and other movies and series about European culture, also you see that very often people are not even aware of alternatives for pregnancy. So the birthing is taking place in a lying down position. So you see that history falsifies itself also. One of the things, by the way, which I think is also very attractive, you hear sometimes about people who have been in labor for 16 hours, 24 hours, and you see that hospitals have a tendency to make the baby come, to force it to come more fast, by giving you a muscle weakener so that you're more relaxed and you can push out more easily, because you don't give so much resistance, because that's what the breeding process does. It basically creates resistance and it tries to open it at the same time. So you're basically fighting yourself in the birthing process. That is really weird. But in the seated position or in the standing position, the labor is much shorter. That is also one of the reasons why it's much less painful. You don't fight yourself so much. Also because of not squeezing and so on, the blood circulation for the baby is much better, so that the chemical processes and the oxygenation of the body through the umbilical cord remains as good as possible. And well, as I said, that is what is good for the baby also feels good for the mother at the same time. So that is basically why this is a very important part. So this is something, when you go give birth, it is something to consider. Of course, there's also alternatives for that, even like giving upright birthing in a bath or anything like that. That is all just to personal preferences. In the past, there was no such thing as birthing in a bath, but I can imagine that you would like to do that. It could be very nice. I've never experienced that as a father, let alone as a mother. That would probably be the greatest thing. You can say like, okay, I can experience these kind of things from past lives or something like this. But that is, it is interesting and it is a good experience, but it's not exactly the real thing, of course. As further preparation for the delivery, rituals are performed in Taoism. Like I said in the previous video also, there is whispering of the priest into the ears of the mother, and that usually is some kind of incantation to create either inner peace or to whisper to the baby that it has to go out, and so forth. So these are different kind of things that can happen. Usually when you have a midwife also, they say things in your ears to make sure that you are continuing, and in lying down midwifery that can be screaming like push, 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 but that is not the case for Taoist priests. They are not emotionally involved in the process. They just try to create constructive thoughts and feelings in the process, so that you are feeding your baby already before the birth and during the birth with wisdom. When you see then there are still some problems. There is acupuncture to help the process, to help relaxation. There are different kind of points for that are being used. In the squatting position you have more choices than when you are in a lying down position. This is also very important. If you want to know more about that, or you want to do a training in that, then just contact me, and we can talk about how to do that. When you want me to come to your place to give school or something like this, to teach you about it, that will be fine. It's easy enough done, certainly nowadays with online classes. Then at the moment when you are further in that process, there is this grace period of a month, 30 days basically, a 1 moon period, where the mother is being kept in isolation. She is tied up so that the belly is being squeezed empty, so that the air can be taken out, and that the water that is inside the body can be reduced, so that the woman gets her youthful shine and form back, other than what you very often see in the neglect for women in the modern methods, where women are being kept with a relative watery belly, which later on in life is also very often the foundation for getting overweight, and that also is in the way for, say, folding forward, doing exercises in other ways, and also gives women a negative feeling about their looks and how people look at them and see them. So these kind of things are, of course, then quite important to take into consideration. Other things that women are doing in that time is, of course, taking care of their baby, but they're also praying to their ancestors. That's a very important part. So in the room where the woman is being kept, there is an altar specially made for the ancestors, to pray that the ancestors are beneficial in their actions towards the newborn child. Now, when you look at the family videos that I made, you see that the child is owned by the family, so it's not necessarily owned by the woman itself, although the mother is the prime caretaker for the child. But that means that the education that is starting from the moment of birth is mainly directed to help the child understand its place in the world. That is a very important part, and we're going to come back to that many times in the future. When you see that she is doing that, praying to the ancestors, there's also an altar for the particular kind of gods that have to do with birthing. These are mostly female gods, and they have to take care for that. And then there is a celebration after 30 days. A celebration because the child has survived the first 30 days. Childbirth is not without any risks, and you see that in the past, the first 30 days, most of the children that would die, they would die in that period. Then the longer a child lives, the smaller the chance that a child will die. So the first 30 days is a very important thing. I remember my wife didn't even know why the first 30 days was important, but after 30 days, when our children were born, we had to have a celebration, and we burned some incense and so on and so on, because it's a happy occasion that they are 30 years old. They call it like a birthday, you can say, the first 30 days. And later on, there are other ceremonies that you take into consideration when the child is growing older. In this first month, the child spends most of the time in the arms or in the bed with the mother. The mother doesn't move about very much. She can only sit in a room and take care of her child. Of course, we know now from chemistry that women during the pregnancy is flooded with all kind of body natural opiates in the body to make sure that the sensation of pregnancy and birthing is done as comfortably as possible. Nowadays, people very often they add extra medication, but it is because they are giving birth in the wrong position. If they would give birth in the right position, then the drugs that your body is producing should be enough to mitigate most of the problems, so that you don't need extra painkillers. But after the process of birthing, there is a period of about 60 days. Yeah, about 60 days to, well, sometimes a little bit longer, but about 60 days when the body still is pretty much flushed with the drugs, and your body is repairing itself, and then gradually it becomes less, and the last bit is going quite radically. It just stops at a certain point, and from one day to the next day that support by the body is gone, because there's no indication that you are still in this birthing process and this repairing process. So as a result of that, many women, they have become overconfident in their feelings, and at the moment when that disappears, all of a sudden they are overtaken by doubts, thoughts that they did have, but all of a sudden they weigh much more. So during the process of the first say 3 to 6 months, it is very important to go do exercise, not like in the gym, but go do something like what we do in the Wudang Fitness, where you learn to move and to exercise in a relaxed way and to feel comfortable with your body, and as a result of that enhance your normal, natural, sensual relationship with yourself, because that is a very important part for being human, is that you're not just an intellectual something, but you're also at the same time a sensuous being which lives in the world, and the world has textures, smells, fragrances and taste and so on. So all these kind of things are very important for us to feel very good about ourselves. If you go too deep in that, then of course you also get lost in that. Like what Lao Tzu says, the tastes and the colors and the fragrances, they all deafen your senses when they are being overdone. So to have them in a mild manner present is important. So similar like that also in food. If food is too tasty, you don't really taste the food anymore. You taste all the enhancements, and that is not really food. At the moment when you are getting to that process, as a mother, you initiate the first educations of the child when it is in the postnatal world. So all these things now take place in the postnatal world. There's nothing there that connects the child to the prenatal world, and the child is what is considered very young, in the sense that it wants to grow, and it is very not so very yin, because it doesn't have much of a body, and the body is not really in control too, so it is not very compact. Child is very fragile. You go sit on it and it dies, you drop it and it breaks. So even though a child has all kind of protections, it has an inborn motoric system which is reflex based, and that is something that children usually lose at the moment when they grow older, because of the way how we educate and the way how we provide stress for our children, and we give them sometimes wrong kind of stress. At the moment when the child is being born, baby massage for Chinese Taoist birth is very important, because you want to make sure that the child doesn't become stiff in the years following. You see sometimes children walking around or adults walking around, they're pretty stiff, and they say, yeah, they already had it at birth and stuff like this. No, children are cramped because of the process of birthing, which is, as we said, unnatural, and therefore puts a lot of stress into kids. But by doing baby massage, the proper baby massage, you maximize the rotation ability of the body and the flexibility and so on, and you will have to maintain that until they are a few years old, to make sure that the body actually remains that kind of flexible, and then when they are old enough, they can incorporate exercises in their daily routine to make sure that they stay flexible. Some children are more easy with that than others. Now, like for instance, I have 2 daughters. One of them by itself, she can very easily go into a split, and the other one really has to work very hard for it because her frustrations were very different than from her sister. Ironically, the one who had the most easy birth is the most stiff, because she felt most frustrated to share that comfort later on with her sister. So that is inside her body. She's developing fine, and the other one is developing fine too. That these are messaging systems that get into somebody's body from a young age, and how they feel in these first months. They have feelings. Babies have feelings. They don't have thoughts, but you can clearly see that feelings are the foundation for thoughts, and that is one thing that in the educational process of children is going to be addressed. So let's first think about these kind of things. When you are going to give birth during the pregnancy, discuss with your partner, male, female, whatever, first what kind of educational plan you're going to have for the child. Of course, when you are doing a Taoist educational plan, I mean, I'm in these videos making an outlay of what you can do. Like I said in the previous video, it's not important to feel guilty about mistakes that you make, but it is important to consider, like, what do you think is wisdom for your child? What kind of skills do you want to educate your kids? What kind of language you want to teach them? What kind of example you want to make for them, want to be for them, and how do you want to share things with them? So these kind of things are all very important, because you are going to be the main educator for a child. Even though it goes to a school, even though you have a private teacher, anything like that, you are going to be the main educator, and the education that you can give them, a school never can give them. And we will talk about that later on also. State government can just not replace parents, although they play their role, and they also play a useful role in this modern time. Let's continue a little bit more thinking about these kind of things and discuss this.